Introduction, welcome. You've found your way to a quiet place, a space to rest, to listen, and perhaps to slowly drift away. Tonight, we traveled back through time, Doctor. Not into fantasy, though it may feel that way at first, Doctor. But into a story far older and darker than any vampire tale. Pavess is not the story of Dracula, the caped count of fiction, slipping through Gothic castles in the dead of night. No, this is a quieter, more unsettling tale. The story of a man who walked in daylight, who breathed and bled, who ruled and punished, and whose shadow still lingers on the edges of maps and memory. His name was Vlad the Third of Wallachia, son of the dragon, later called Diem. But who was he, really? A tyrant, a patriot, a monster built of flesh and bone. And why does his story still haunt us? Tuck yourself in. Let the candlelight of imagination flicker. We begin, not with a scream, but with silence, and a fortress, nestled deep in the Carpathian fog. Segment 1. The man behind the monster. Imagine yourself in 15th century Plum, a land pressed tightly between rival empires, where mist coils over the forest floor, and distant hooves echo like thunder in the hills. This was not a peaceable time. Wallachia, now part of modern-day Romania, was a small, often overlooked principality caught between the powerful kingdom of Hungary to the west, till the vast Ottoman Empire to the east. Its rulers were forced to navigate a delicate, often deadly balancing act. And few walked that tightrope with more brutal clarity than Vlad III. He was born in 1431 in the fortress city of Saisawara, a medieval town of spires, stone walls, and cobbled streets. His father, Vlad, too, was a member of the chivalric Order of the Dragon, a group sworn to defend Christianity against Ottoman expansion. Because of this title, he was called Vlad Dracula, or Vlad the Dragon, and so his son became Dracula, quite literally, son of the dragon. But dragons rarely raise their young gently. At the age of just 11 or 12, Vlad and his younger brother were taken as political hostages by the Ottoman Sultan. It was a common practice, meant to ensure their father's loyalty. For years, Vlad lived in the heart of the empire. He would come day, surrounded by Islamic customs, foreign tongues, and a court built on power and precision. He was not tortured nor mistreated, but he was watched, shaped, held in gilded chain. When he returned to Wallachia, it was a different place. His father had been assassinated, his older brother buried alive, his homeland teetering in chaos. It was from this soil of betrayal and bitterness that his reign took root. Vlad's rule was harsh and swift in its punishments. He reclaimed his throne not once, but 3 times, through cunning and force. He understood that mercy was rare currency in his world, and that fear could be more reliable than good. His signature method of punishment, impalement, was horrifying in its message. Wooden stakes were sharpened, bodies raised high above the earth, left to sway in the wind as both warning and spectacle. According to some accounts, entire fields were filled with the dead, their silence more effective than any speech. And yet, even in the face of this cruelty, his rule had structure. He cracked down on theft, on corruption, He punished the boyars, the local nobility, many of whom had plotted and killed his father. By in one famous tale, he invited dozens of them to a banquet, only to have them executed mid-feast, claiming that treachery had no place at his table. To the people of Wallachia, Vlad was not simply a tyrant. He was of all against invasion, a ruler who took the fight to the Ottomans, who pushed back against tribute and submission. When Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, sent envoys demanding Vlad's allegiance, Vlad had them executed. Not out of madness, but message. He ruled in his mind, not with cruelty, but with necessity. Still, stories of his brutality spread far beyond his border. German pamphlets painted him as a demon. Tales of mass executions, boiling cauldrons, even a cup of blood at every meal. Whether these were exaggerations, propaganda, or partial truths is difficult to untangle. By the image they created, a ruler of nightmarish vengeance would prove almost impossible to erase. In his lifetime, Vlad was feared. After his death, he became something else, not a man, not even a memory, but a myth, a presence that refused to stay buried. And yet, the people of Wallachia did not forget him in the same way. The word, their memory, too, would shape the story, but in a different direction entirely. Segment 2. A nation haunted by history centuries past, and yet some names never leave the soil. While the West whispered stories of blood and shadow, of a prince who drank from goblets laced with horror, the people of Romania, and especially those in the lands once called Wallachia, remembered Vlad differently, not as a monster in the night, but as something closer, something more complex, a necessary force, a defender of order. Here, a ruler who did what others would not. To understand this dual memory, we must first return to the land itself. Imagine the Romanian countryside. Slow, undulating hills rising into mountains, where villages gather like quiet clusters around the base of ancient forests. The rhythm of life here has changed little over centuries. Narrow lane, clare-roofed homes, stone wells, and wooden churches with painted icons glowing softly in the flickering light of oil lamps. And behind that peace, a long history of invasions, shifting powers, and fragile sovereignty. Vlad's memory was kept alive in songs, in tales passed down through families, not always with affection, but with a certain respect. He was remembered as Gepek the Impaler. Yes, a harsh man, but also a just one in his own way. He was the prince who protected his borders. When others bowed, the ruler who demanded honesty in a time when corruption flowed as freely as the river. By. It is said that during Vlad's reign, a golden cup sat at a public fountain, and no one dared steal it. Was the story true? Perhaps not. But its persistence tells us what people longed for. A leader who could keep peace, not through kindness, but through unshakable control. As centuries wore on, Romania endured the rule of others. The Ottoman Empire, the Habsburgs, communist regime. In each age, old symbols were reinterpreted, and so Vlad became, slowly, not a villain, but a figure of national identity. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as nationalism stirred across Europe, Romanian historians began to revisit Vlad's legacy. They emphasized his resistance to the other, his commitment to sovereignty, his fierce protection of Romanian land by the brutality remained. But it became a side note, a footnote to a larger story of defiance and order. Even during the communist era, Vlad was refrained. He became an emblem of strength, a man of the people, unafraid to punish the wealthy and distant. His image appeared in textbooks, monuments were restored, streets bore his name, and his childhood home in Saya became a place of quiet pilgrimage. To walk those cobbled streets today is to feel a strange echo, a blending of myth, patriotism, and ambiguity. Tour guides tell two stories. One of Dracula, the vampire, the fiction, the gothic fog. The other of Vlad, the ruler, the warrior, the man of unshakable will. Sometimes they are told in the same breath. By this duality remains at the heart of Romania's relationship with Vlad. 3. He is both feared and revered, a warning and a symbol. And perhaps that is what makes his legacy so enduring. Not because it is simple, but because it refuses. In the West, the myth was taking another shape in time. And at the center of that transformation stood a man with a pen, a writer, seated in gaslit London, leafing through folk tales and foreign legend, searching for the perfect monster. Segment 3, Bram Stoker's secret research. In the quiet evenings of London, as the 19th century waned, a man named Bram Stoker sat hunched over a cluttered desk, the gaslight flickering across his handwritten notes and well-worn books. He was not yet famous, not yet the author of one of the world's most enduring horror novels. He was a theater manager by day, loyal assistant to the actor Henry Irving, and a writer by night, a diligent one, methodical and curious. When he set out to write Dracula, Stoker didn't begin with Vlad the Impaler. In fact, for most of his early research, the name Dracula did not appear at all. Instead, his notebooks are filled with references to old superstitions, East European burial customs, Hungarian folk remedies, travelogues by diplomats and missionaries who wandered through Transylvania and the Balkans. He copied down tales of Nosferatu, the undead, of ghosts who fed on the breath of the living, truth of creatures who could not cross running water, who feared garlic and could not be seen in mirrors. Bit by bit he gathered fragments, It was during this process that he stumbled across the name Dracula. He found it in an old history book, an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, written by a British consul. In it, Vlad III was described briefly, a cruel but resolute prince, associated with darkness and impalement. The name struck him. Dracula, so close to dragon, and yet so close to devil. In Romanian, Dracula could mean both. He made a note. Dracula, in Wallachian language, means devil. That wasn't quite accurate, but the poetry of it was irresistible. And so his villain was born, not as Vlad himself, but as something inspired by his aura, a kind of echo, shaped less by historical fact than by Gothic need. What Stoker chose not to include is just as interesting. He never described impalement. He did not recount the massacres or battlefield horrors attributed to Vlad. Instead, his Dracula is distant, cold, aristocratic, a man of mystery and decay, whose terror lies in seduction, not brutality. There is no mention of Vlad's real battles, his life as a hostage, his wars against the Ottomans. Stoker was not interested in historical biography. He was creating a creature that reflected the fears of his own time, the fear of the foreign, the fear of the ancient, the fear of losing control in an age of rapid change. In Victorian England, science and superstition coexisted uneasily. Theories of evolution and disease challenged old beliefs. Immigration was reshaping cities, and the British Empire, once so confident, was showing signs of strain. Enter this atmosphere. Stoker released his novel in 1897, Dracula. It was not an instant sensation. Reviews were mixed. Sales were modest. But over time, the book began to settle into the public mind like mist over moorland. And the creature at its heart, this silent, shape-shifting figure who slipped into bedrooms, who corrupted innocence, who could live forever, became more real than the man who had inspired it. It's possible that Bram Stoker never knew just how much of a doorway he had opened. That by naming his vampire after Vlad, he had fused two legacies, one of historical brutality, the other of mythic horror, into a single, inescapable shadow. A shadow that still stretches across film, art, and literature today. But what is it about this story that endures? Why do we still return to Dracula again and again, long after we've forgotten the details of Vlad Stoker himself? Perhaps the answer lies not in history or fiction, but in something deeper. A fascination with the one thing none of us can escape: time, and what it takes from us. Segment 4: Blood, Power, and Immortality. What makes a monster unforgettable? Why does Dracula, not merely as a figure of fiction, but as a symbol, still linger in our cultural imagination, like a shadow just beyond the candle's reach? It may be because he represents more than fear. He represents longing. The vampire myth, in all its forms, is not only about danger, but about desire, about what we wish we could escape, and what we wish we could keep. Time death, decay, the inevitable erosion of power, youth, and beauty. Dracula, in his many forms, promises the opposite. He does not age. He does not weaken. He walks through centuries, unchanged, untouched. He drinks deeply from others, and never empties. It is no accident that his story endures in every generation. Each new era finds in him a different metaphor. For deceit, for sale, for seduction, for class, for invasion, for control. In the earliest versions, he was a foreign threat, a symbol of Eastern Europe encroaching upon the West. Later, he became the decadent aristocrat, the predator in fine clothing, feeding upon the poor. In more modern tales, his loneliness made manifest, a creature trapped by eternity and always. Beneath the fangs and fog, there is this, the hunger for immortality, to never fade, to never die, to remain powerful. When everything else begins to weaken, even Vlad the Impaler, in his own way, saw this. Not by drinking blood, but by staining history, by ruling in a way that could not be forgotten, by leaving fields of warning where others left only laws. He may not have lived forever, but he succeeded in another kind of permanence. You still know his name. And perhaps that is the quiet truth behind both man and myth. The desire not just to survive, but to matter. To leave something behind that resists the silence of time. Today, Dracula has transcended both his literary and historical origin. Because he has become a symbol. One reshaped with each tenor, dressed in new robes, speaking in new accents, always changing, and yet, somehow, always the same. He reflects what we feel, what we want, and what we might become if we are willing to trade our softness for certainty. Our mortality for mastery, our humanity for permanence. In that sense, the true horror of Dracula is not the bite, not the cave, not the coffin. It's the whisper, the invitation, that somewhere deep within us, we understand the temptation, conclusion, and so we return from a long corridor of shadow, from the misty mountains of Wallachia, the flickering candlelit studies of Victorian writers, and the silver screen silhouettes that have followed us ever since. The story of Dracula is not just about a vampire, or even a prince. It's about how we remember, how we shape our fears into fables, our rulers into legends, our monsters into mirrors. Vlad the Impaler was not a creature, a fantasy. He was real as the soil beneath Romanian fields, and as brutal as the age he lived in. But history softened him into symbol, just as fiction sharpened him into something supernatural. Tonight, perhaps you'll fall asleep with those images gently dissolving, not frightening, but fascinating, not screaming, but whispering. A memory, half real and half myth, stretched across the centuries. Thank you for wandering with me, and as you rest now, far from the dark castles and bloody battlefields. Please, may you find peace in the knowledge that history, even at its most terrifying, cannot follow you into dreams, only drift alongside them quietly like mist.